To allow all attendees to hear you, this system will
can see my screen, but he was like, "Oh, here's the data mart we're going to create," and then he has no problem doing something like this dim machine, and then dim machine type, and dim plant, and then dim country, and dim material. That kind of snowflake schema. He had absolutely no problem with that. Where a lot of data mart designers would be a little bit reluctant to do that because one, data marts are meant to make it easy to kind of sift through the data if you're a user. And the more relationships you have, the harder it is for users to look for the data that they're looking for. Um, and two, hang on, Rob just joined, so let me just make him an organizer and unmute him. And two, the second reason why they like it is because in cube processing for multidimensional cubes, it's much, much faster if it's done in a star schema instead of a snowflake schema. So that might not always be true, but and there are certain rules around that, but it's just generally accepted as a good rule of thumb. Hey, Rob.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Thanks for joining. So I just kind of went through my initial impressions of this chapter. A lot of it was just kind of like follow this wizard and go through the cube wizard. But I was mentioning that I kind of liked, seeing his take on how to create a data mart. I liked his naming conventions, and I liked the fact that he didn't shy away from a snowflake schema that, where most examples would focus on a star schema.
Yeah, I like this chapter quite a bit more than the others because this a lot of this stuff is new to me, and I felt it was a little more digestible, like this kind of seeing it laid out and like starting to actually get into the product.
Right. So you had probably never used like the cube wizard before.
That is correct.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of power in there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's one of those where it seems it's really helpful for someone getting started and out of the box. Uh, oh, I mean that's a wizard's job, so.
Right. And I dig like the time dimension creator, right? How it just creates the table and populates it with all the dates.
Mhm.
So like in general, can you see my screen okay?
I think it looks great.
Okay, good. In general, it's weird. I think one of the main problems that people have when they look at analysis services is just how kind of embedded with what most developers would think is schema. Um, they would kind of get overwhelmed when playing with analysis services because analysis services is very aware of the data that's inside the cube, like, and it's aware of its position in the cube. So like those time things, when you look at like this dimension here that I'm calling my date dimension, right? He kind of talks a little bit about the hierarchy that you can create in the date dimension. And he says, hey, there's a calendar here, and like here's a date calendar, and you have like year and semester and quarter and month and date, right? Um, like this data in the database looks like looks like this. It looks like this date, right? And if I right click and I kind of select 1,000 rows, you kind of see the structure here where you see like 2005, 01, and then it's the seventh day of the week, and that's a Saturday, and it's January, right? And you're looking at that and you're thinking, oh, well, in T-SQL, if I wanted to know all the dates in January 2005, I'd write something like this, where date key greater than or equal to 1/1/2005, and date key less than or equal to 1/31/2005. Maybe you could even do 11 p.m., right? And then you query that. Oh, excuse me, it's end. So let's go back to get a good data type because I think I've got a date data type in there that's better than date key. So where is it? Well, or in this case, what you could do is just say where year equals 2005. Oh, there's full date alternate key. We'll use that one. Full date alternate key there, and then there, and that's what T-SQL looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the weird thing about like T-SQL is like you have a very difficult time saying, okay, now compare all of these dates with the exact same dates a year later, right? In T-SQL, you end up kind of doing that math in your head, right? Well, one of the cool things about like the date dimension that we saw in chapter 5 is that those dates are kind of embedded in in the logic of the queries, like, and it's hard for me to even explain this without showing you. So this is an Mdx query, and this is real simple. I'm just going to say, just query the AdventureWorks cube, and what you'll see is you'll see one number here, this 80,000 or $80 million, right? So first off, that query by itself wouldn't even work in T-SQL, right? Because there's no asterisk, right? But if I say, okay, what I really want is I want internet sales amount. So I can say measures dot internet sales amount, and then query that, and it says, okay, here, internet sales amount is $29 million. Okay, so that's the total amount of sales I've made over the internet for the lifetime of my company. And now if I want to see that by year, I would just say calendar dot calendar year, and then now I'm seeing that by year. Okay, well, so far that MDX is a little bit intuitive, but here's where it's not really intuitive, right? What I can do is I can actually say, I want a very specific calendar year, and the one I want is this one, 2005. So let me get rid of this, and then let me put like this 2005 down here. Okay, do you see that? Do you see how it's embedded in the query right there? Like that's not a string, that's like, there it is, $3 million for 2005. And if I want to see 2006, I can just say next member, and there's 2006. Or I can say next member, and I can say 2007. So in that wizard, when you said, hey, this dimension is a time dimension, what you're doing is you're telling analysis services to be time aware so that it understands the levels of that dimension. It understands that when I'm comparing 2005 with 2006, that's at the year level. And when I'm comparing, January 2005 with January 2006, that's at the month level, right? So, we would call those cousins, right? If I said, give me the first month of the year level in one slice of the cube, and the first month of the same period, we would call that parallel period, and the next part of the cube, that analysis service is smart enough to do that. And not only that, but I can say, you know what, I actually want to see all the months of 2005. And I can say, okay, give me all of your members. Let's do calendar year dot members. Okay, there we go. So actually, this is calendar year, the calendar year level, and then everything beneath that would be all periods. That's that $29 million number, and then every single year down underneath that, including two that we don't actually have data yet for. So the reason why I'm talking about that is because I was like, that wizard is actually pretty slick. You could just say, hey, that dimension that I'm playing with right now is a time dimension, and I want you to be time aware when dealing with that dimension. I want you to understand the levels that are involved. And then remember how they said, oh, you can also specify a fiscal year? He said that, I don't know, briefly. He said, sometimes you can when you deal with the date dimension, you can specify a calendar year or a fiscal year. And this is what that looks like, where they have like a calendar hierarchy here and a fiscal hierarchy there. And those ranges can be different, right? Like Microsoft's fiscal year ends June 30th. The US government's, the federal government, I don't know about state governments, but the federal government's fiscal year ends September 30th. So when dealing with those entities, you can change your fiscal year off the calendar year and then query on it, and it understands the same comparisons. Yeah.
I have a couple things to add.
Yeah.
First off, I enjoy again, because this is very new to me. I enjoy how we've been reading about how much these tables get flattened out and stuff. And I've been reading that thing. Okay, it's flat to my head, but when you the first time you see how flat that time dimension gets, it gets very real. Wow, they're not joking about denormalizing this. The other thing that I thought was really cool was the date key. How it's just an integer, and that resonated with me right off the bat because so many times, like in other data stores, like Redis or something that isn't aware of dates, I often have to fall back into Unix type integers for any sort of date sorting. That's just kind of cool to see that same kind of concept is applied for the date key. And the third thing I noticed is how long have you been doing this? Like you're very smooth with the MDX stuff. I was kind of wondering, how long did it take you to start feeling really comfortable writing these queries? Because it's a lot like SQL, but with subtle variations.
Well, yeah, I'm not good at switching languages like a lot of people. Like I have to, and the more languages I know, I feel like the slower I am in all of them. So, like in, Link looks a lot like SQL, and MDX looks like SQL, and so I'll be like in Link, and I'll use the pipe, right, and then
Yeah.
I'll be in SQL, and oh wait, no, it's select from. I mean, you would think working in SQL for 17 years, I wouldn't have to remember to put a star in a query. I was actually in a demo the other day where I did select from the table name because I was used to MDX. I'd been working in MDX that week. And then they're like, that doesn't work. It's select star from table name. And I'm like, oh, yeah, of course it is. I think the more languages I know, sometimes it's not a very good thing. But and to answer your first question, I don't know that anybody is super comfortable in MDX. Like and I can show you guys some MDX if you are interested in it, because there are definitely some tricks to working with it. And maybe we'll do that a little later. I don't know. In this agenda, does
I
he?
think it'd be fun to come back to the MDX stuff.
Yeah, I think after we populate a cube and you see how you can browse the cube, then it makes MDX all the more real, right? And just so you guys know, it's easy to browse a cube in SQL Server Management Studio. You just kind of right click the cube that you want to browse, like here, and you just browse it. And what you get is the world's worst cube browser. So you just say, I was playing with internet sales amount here, and then you saw me open up date and then go to calendar year and drop that there, right? And you get this kind of stuff. Or what you would want to see is the hierarchy, right? You'd want to see the year. Now the problem with that is if I add quarter, it just looks kind of ugly. So what Microsoft wants you to do is to use Excel 2013, which we all have licensed, right? And we're using awesome. And so we open up a blank workbook and we just go to data from other data sources, from analysis services, and we say, yeah, use that cube, and then finish, and then we want a pivot table. And now it's the same thing. Basically, you're seeing the same thing, except everything over here is on the right side. And you can say, yeah, take internet sales amount, put that in my values. Excuse me, that in my values. Okay, and then go to that date dimension, and now find the hierarchy. This one, and put that on rows, and now what you get is a much better browser, right? where you can expand the different levels, and you can see the different levels in your pivot table, kind of the way you would have expected to see it in SQL Server Management Studio, only it was pretty terrible.
Well, I think this also starts to set up the self-service BI story a bit.
Yeah, this is the beginning level to that. Of course, self-service BI has a lot more tools involved, and I can show you those tools as the book progresses. But yeah, this is the beginning of it. And people should be familiar with pivot tables, right? Because we've had them for a long time, and it's the main tool that most analysts use to do their job. If you've been in a data department at all, you've had somebody say, I don't care about all this, I just want it in a pivot table. And then you have to give them the data so they can look at it in a pivot table. I would say that's 90% of what an analyst wants to do with the data. And it's just because, they're comfortable with it. They understand all the tools. They understand row filtering, and they understand, if they wanted to, it's just so easy. If they want to see, all of my yearly sales by country, they just know how to get that going really easily. Right.
I wanted to ask you this on table 6, because we hit on this a little bit last month, and how this book has some really good information, and it's okay, I get, and then there's just this kind of out of left field stuff that happens. And in chapter 6, when he goes into table compression, to me that kind of felt like the kind of out of left field concept of, okay, I'm getting started with this data mart, getting a feel for it, and then it introduces something like table compression, which I
I
don't feel to
actually
be
thought that was out of place also, right? Because I go to a lot of data marts, and nobody has compression turned on until I turn it on. I mean, hardly anybody, unless they've had a major space problem. But I think I said it in an earlier meeting. Most data marts are not that big. When I go to a law firm and I look at their major data stores, right? They save every email that they ever look at. They save every document, and they don't just save every document. They save literally 100 versions of that single document. As that document morphed on its way to being finished, they'll save every single version of it. Or when people fax, if courts, believe it or not, still fax sometimes, they image the fax and then catalog the fax. Or if they have to deal with a government organization for patent filing or corporate bylaws or something like that, those faxes and filings get imaged and saved. So when you look at a terabyte of data, very little of that is data we care about, right?
right.
It's just not a lot that we really want. What we want is we want to know money, usually, or we want to know inventory, or we want to know like purchasing, or we want to know some type of efficiency rating. If we're rating doctors, we want to know, are they serving their patients well? If we're rating college professors, we want to know if they're teaching their students well. Or if we're rating our students, we want to know if they're getting good grades, right? Well, those are all number based. Those are aggregates. And aggregates are ints, and usually there's nothing that needs to be much more efficient than either an int, a money, or a float, right? And the great thing about those three things is that they're small. We don't care about the big number, right? We are not generally cataloging things that are 15 trillion, right? And so as a consequence, space doesn't have, if it's architected correctly, space doesn't have to be a problem. Now, where we fall into a trap is in these giant data warehouse projects. People will often confuse that with their data archival policy, and it's really common. And an executive will say, "Oh, one place for all of our data, so let's put every piece of data we have in it." And now you're just doubling it, because they're not going to delete it from their source systems, right? And so now you've got these giant data warehouses that are very confusing, that users can't use because they don't know where to get data. They see a lot of duplicate data, and a lot of dirty data, and it's just misplaced. So they really need to like separate our data marts from where they're storing data long term, so that the data marts can be very, very small. And I think a very good, healthy data mart, you can achieve a lot in 5 gigs or 10 gigs. Where data marts get big is when they're doing like clickstream data, like web analytics. Like web analytic data marts are the biggest ones in the world, right? They want to know what users are hitting their pages, where the refers are, where they're dropping out, where they're staying for the entire ad. Video data marts too, where how long are viewers looking at things. Those are big. Auditing data marts, any type of auditing user access, those can get big. And then what other type have I seen that's just huge? I don't know. Those are the kind of one. Those are the ones that kind of. Oh yeah, there was a huge one where they were doing gas metering, and they wanted to know, what people's energy usage was. And I've worked with the company that does that, and their data marts are gigantic because people use a lot of energy. So they want it at the transaction level. It's just going to be huge. But for the most part, if you're like running a retail company or something, or you're a car dealership, or you're a university, university has a finite number of students, 10,000. They all take, 5 classes a semester. You're really only dealing with, 50,000, 100,000 records per year. You've been in business 10 years, you're looking at 1 million records. And the reality is that you probably don't even need 10 years of data, because you're not doing any type of 10-year trend analysis. You're probably doing just 13-month trend analysis. And that stuff can be relatively small.
I just thought it's funny that in that whole compression thing, which I thought was out of place, he has this sentence that is something, when he's talking about like the complexities of like page and row compression, he has this little blurb that's like, it's important to know that what's really just most important is to know that we have ways to compress data if you need to. And I kind of think that that whole thing should have just been that sentence, wait for later
Yeah.
on down the road to go further into the different types of compression.
Yeah. Now, maybe he had an agenda, and I can see that, where he's like, hey, compression should be used, right? Like, there's no reason to not use it. And if you've got a big, data
It
mart.
should be used if you bought the certain edition that has it.
Oh, right, right, right. Yeah, you should use it if you have the enterprise edition, right? Yeah, good point. Yeah. Yeah, row compression. And I thought it was interesting. I mean, I actually thought that his description of it was pretty good, and I actually thought I would steal his description of it for my classes. So I liked, because I do have to explain it in my courses. Yeah.
Cool. Was there anything else in chapter 6 that jumped out at you?
Um,
Or do you want to jump to chapter 7?
yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. Was there anything else that I liked? I just liked the vocabulary definitions at the beginning, and some of the vocabulary definitions I thought he explained it really well. That's kind of why I'm enjoying this book. And what was it? I had a question for you, Rob. Like,
Mm-hmm.
were you bored silly when you created the tables at the beginning?
I still don't have a SQL server to build any of this off of.
Okay.
So I mean, I'm just reading along, and I'm kind of getting mad at myself because he has his sections of okay, now to close the book and do this, which it's disappointing because I know that would help me a lot, but I just haven't done it.
Yeah. And then I also like the part where he was talking about executive sponsorship. Um, and he's totally right. Like, we have to remember when we write these things that primarily these are decision maker tools. And if the decision makers aren't involved in making the tool, then they're not going to use it. They're just going to go back to their old way, and then you'll have another failed project. So I did like that part. Yeah, we can go to chapter 7. So SSIS.
I definitely felt more comfortable in chapter 7.
Yeah, so you've used SSIS, right?
Oh yeah,
Okay, cool. And um, do you like it?
I would say it's a very love-hate. I started, using SSIS back in 2005 when it
Yeah.
was a bit raw. So, so on those newer versions, I have to kind of let go of some preconceptions on stuff as things get tweaked and enhanced and fixed. Uh, I certainly have a lot of complaints about it, but overall, if I need to get something done and don't want to involve the app devs, SSIS is a tool that can let most data professionals get stuff done.
Yeah. Um, that's why, okay, I like it for two reasons, and I might be alone in that. Like, it seems to me like a lot of people don't really like it. Like when I talk to professionals, I feel like they either think that they can write it better themselves, which I find very interesting, um, or two, they have another tool that they've paid for, like Informatica, or there's like three or four other tools out there that they can use, um, or they think it's too complicated and they prefer DTS. And then there's another problem that people have with SSIS in general is they don't like the deployment model. Like
Yeah.
going from development to test to production is painful, right? So, but I like the tool because, like yesterday, a brand new company called me and said, "We're having a devil of a time grabbing some files, throwing them into the SQL where we flatten them, and then putting them out into other files so that we can upload it to our website with FTP." And from the time they asked me to do that until the time it was completed was probably about 45 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Now, you can only get that with like a graphical tool like this where you're not really coding, right? I mean, that kind
Yeah.
of lift.
And what you're saying, I think, is one of the better use cases for SS. That's a use case where it really shines, and being able to version it and keep a whole process under source control is really handy.
Wait, say that again? You
So,
cut out.
so that, so sorry, so that scenario that you just mentioned, a simple transform and a push and stuff, I think SSIS really excels out of that and lets you get down to business because it's not overly complex where you start to hit some of the real sharp edges of SSIS. And I think that's one of the better use cases. And what's really nice about SSIS is that you can source and version your process and your transform and everything.
Right, right. So I can see where you would say that, where you would say it's good if you don't hit any of the sharp edges. And what do you do when you do hit the sharp edges? Do you just go to either a script component or just get it into a state in general and then write the hard stuff yourself?
More times than not, I'm ending up having to go to a script component. So
Okay.
I really don't like doing FTP anymore. I like doing, uh, SFTP over SSH. Well, there's not a really good story for that in SSIS. So I'm having to drop out into command line tool, an execute task or a script task or something. And that
Oh,
kind of feels hacky. Or say something like web service. They claim that you can use a web service, but it's kind of like that real old school version. Like I can't pull down JSON stuff very easily. So I end up having to go to a script task.
right, right. Yeah, I can definitely see your complaint. And it does feel like now I'm going into, you go to SSIS and you have like event handlers and logging and auditing, right? And all the things that you want, breakpoints and everything. And then you go to a script task and you have to remember to use those things, right? You have to remember to audit it, to log it,
Yeah. Oh,
and
so the variables are really powerful in SSIS, but there's quite a bit of pain initially getting familiar with how they work and the scoping and stuff. So that's one thing I forget about because I really like variables in it now, but there's a
yeah.
little bit of a learning curve there. And I think he does a good job of explaining it.
Yeah, I'm hoping he takes it. Oh, I guess you've read further on, so
Oh.
he'll he walks us through a lot of it, right?
Yeah, he starts going over every. That's probably why I churned through the next couple of chapters. He was like, "Yeah, I know this stuff," and
Yeah. One thing I
yeah,
wanted to try out that was in the book that I never really noticed before is like I've got like hundreds of hours in SSIS, right? And that might be on the low side. But I never contemplated what would happen if you were colorblind. Like I'm not colorblind, so I never really cared about is that a green arrow or is that a red arrow? Um, I never that's always easy to tell for me.
yeah.
And
I
then
think the shading is different enough.
oh, you do? You're not colorblind, are you?
No, I'm not, but I mean, I've worked with plenty of colorblind people,
Yeah. So
and
he
it's not that like any shade of green looks exactly like any shade of red. I mean, there's there's gray areas.
yeah. So he says, click here to show precedence constraint labels, and then you'll see success and failure.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
yeah, that's good for.
That's
I
something I
learned
think I
some.
would just said in general.
Yeah, I think that's actually I agree with you that it's good in general to because the one thing is like this success and failure looks an awful lot like if you have an ADO.NET source, it looks an awful lot like this is rows that passed validation, and then this is rows that didn't, right? And that might not be a failure, right? That red on this side. So actually, I wonder if that happens. Like if you do,
Well, and there's also the blue completion path too.
yeah, right. So this could be like,
It,
okay,
it, and someone watching while he does this, this probably looks and sounds very simple when he just has two items and a line connecting them. But when you open up an SSIS package that has like 100 elements and arrows everywhere, it can start to get you can start to get a little colorblind yourself with everything blending together.
yeah, yeah, totally. I also wondered if like it would label these too, like these are the good rows, these are the bad rows, but it
Mm-hmm.
didn't label that either. But it did label that.
One thing I liked that I didn't really see him do in the chapters I read is using the well, first I hate just the default that everything is data flow task two because it tells me nothing. And I know he wants to make
Yeah,
something presentable and approachable, but at some point I'd like him to address like, okay, you might want to name these something that's relevant and being able to use some of the white space for commenting around a process or task.
right. So you and I are just kind of going off on our own thing, and I realize that we have people listening. So I feel like I should like real quick just start a new package, and because you and I are obviously very comfortable in this tool. Um, so this tool, in my opinion, is one of the most overwhelming tools that Microsoft has ever made. And I realize that you're watching Rob and I like flip around like we're experts in it, but I remember in 2005 being overwhelmed by this tool.
Yeah.
Like I remember looking at it thinking, what do I do now? I don't know what to do.
I did the classic. I saw it, played with it, and went right back to DTS as my knee jerk reaction.
Right. Yeah, I did that too. I was just like, I can't deal with this. This is way too hard. Right now. At the time I needed to get something done. And I was like, I have to spend some time to learn that. I can't work with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was so different. So I'm gonna kind of hopefully right now make this a little more accessible to you in like the next 10 minutes, okay? The first thing is you heard Rob and I talk about parameters and variables and events and auditing. Don't worry about any of that. 90% of the power of SSIS is on this tab, this control flow tab, and this tab, this data flow tab. So when he talks in the book about control flow or data flow, that's what he's talking about, are those two tabs. And what's the difference? Well, SSIS is an ETL tool, which means it extracts data from some place. It plays with it, that's transforming it, and then it loads it someplace else. And SSIS does not care if any of those places are SQL Server. You can grab a bunch of XML data, play with it, and put it into an Excel workbook. You can grab a bunch of Oracle data, play with it, and then put it back into Oracle or put it into a CSV, right? You can grab a bunch of data, create some files, and FTP it someplace. So if that flow of data is so important, that's what that data flow tab does right there. That data flow tab flows data from one place to another. And that leaves this tab. This important tab is the control flow statement. And I wish they had named it control of flow, because every developer knows what control of flow is, right? What's control of flow?
The order of execution.
Yeah, it's like what's our basic control flow statement? The first one we learn when we start our first language is if. We say,
Okay.
if this happens, then this happens, right? Well, that's what's happening here, only instead of having if-then constraints, what we're doing is we're saying, first, I want to execute this SQL task, then I want to start a data flow, and I want that to be dependent on that. And that's that workflow that you saw me do earlier with the success right there. Do that, and if that's successful, then do that. And I can inspect things if I'd like. I can inspect things through an expression task, like if this column is true, then do this, otherwise do something else. The other thing I can do, and we do this in many languages, is we loop. And that's what containers are. And he told you that in this chapter. He said, we have two main looping constructs, for and for each, and every .NET developer knows what those do. One iterates a set number of times, and the other, for each, iterates through a set number of elements. So for each is good if we're kind of looping through like all the files in a file system. And we can specify that. We can say, go to this folder and do something, one for every file you find in that folder. And that's great if we're getting data dumps from a vendor, and those data dumps are like one file per customer that we surveyed. And some days they survey 10, and other days they survey 200. It won't matter, because your for each loop will pick up every file every time it runs. And if it needs to run 200 times, it'll run 200 times. So um, So that's the main difference, and I'm going to repeat that just so you know. Control flow does exactly what you think it would do. It controls the flow of the whole package as it executes, like a workflow. And then data flow says, at a certain point in control flow, when you get to the data flow, make the data flow through a pipeline of things that need to happen. So once you know that, then it kind of makes sense what these control flow statements do, right? So let's focus on control flow. So these tasks are like FTP, like I want to load a file to an FTP site, and I used that yesterday. Send mail, like once this is done, send an email with the attachment, or send a mail to somebody saying, hey, I finished this, or I failed this. And you can execute a SQL Server agent job if you'd like. You can launch a message queue task. You can rebuild an index. You can transfer jobs. This is good if I've used this as one-off packages as I was working with one server we were retiring and replacing it with another server, and I didn't want to have to script all the jobs, because the problem with scripting jobs, I don't know if you guys knew that you could do this or not, but in regular OLTP SQL and the regular engine, when you hit a job, you can just right click on the job and then script the job as a create, and then you can take that to another server and just run it, and it creates your job for you. But the problem is you have to do it one at a time, right? There's no multi-select in this interface, which is kind of a pain. And for me, the server I was working with, it had I'm not kidding, it must have been 200 jobs. So I just used this transfer jobs task, and I moved it all from the old server over to the new server all in one swoop, and it took me 5 minutes rather than 2 hours or something. And you can do the same thing with logins and so forth. So we're going to do just a really quick task here. And usually what you see is this pattern. You see like truncate table, and then you see move employees. Okay. So if we want to truncate the table, the first thing we need to do is specify a connection. And you just click here, and you get, when you click new connection, you get this famous screen, which we've seen in every single application that I've ever worked with. Going back to ADO.NET 2.0 in COM, probably even had it in RDO, I think. I can't remember that far back. So you can click the database that you want and test the connection, and it says, yep, your credentials work. And now I've got a connection to a T-SQL database, and I can go to my execute SQL task editor, and I can say, first use that connection. Excuse me, not new. Use that connection, and then type in a statement that you want. You can say like truncate table employees, and then click OK. And then now you want to move employees, and so you double click data flow. Now look, this is kind of weird, this interface. See, when I'm in control flow and I have this like move employees thing here, and I double click it, I move tabs from control flow over to data flow. And now I'm not really in a workflow space like I was before. I'm in a data flow space where I can say, okay, here's my ODBC source for my employee source data. And then here's my ODBC destination. And I can call this employee destination. And then I just drag the data flow down. Now, in the source, I can say, oh, excuse me, did I use ODBC, not OLADB? Oh, I think I did. Let me delete that. So OLADB source first. We'll call this.
Is that the first time you've ever done that, Ike?
Yeah, right. Employee source. And then OLADB destination. No, it is not the first time I've done that. Employee destination. I think part of the problem, I think, once you get familiar with the tool is you almost stop thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here I'll use like HR employees, click OK, and then here I'll say make a new table that we'll call employee temp, and click OK, and then and then we'll click mappings just to make sure all the mappings go over, and that's fine. And now I'm going to change my truncate just so that this thing actually works. I'm going to call it truncate table employee temp. Okay. Now this is a very basic package over here, and this package is here called package 1. That's not very descriptive, so I'll rename it to move employees. Okay, and then save it, and that's SSIS in a nutshell. Now, I'm going to show you. Did I show you last week or last month the right way to execute an SSIS package?
No, I'd like it just because I made sure that it talks about it in this chapter, and I love this as an organizational tool when you start getting multiple processes. Can you throw this into a sequence container real quick?
Yeah. And I like sequence
and
containers.
collapse it and disable it and just show like really quickly the value of the sequence container.
Yeah, sequence containers are great because sometimes you'll have like 15 things, and you'll want them as a unit, and like as your packages get more complicated, see how this is like it's inside that sequence container, right? You see that? Okay. And what I can do on the sequence container is right click and disable the whole thing, or right click and enable the whole thing as a unit. And now, and as I move the sequence container, it's like a way of logically grouping these things together in an otherwise large package.
Well, and then you can call it the the move employees container and collapse it when you have a bunch of other stuff going on.
Right, and that's through this arrow here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, It's really useful.
Love the sequence
Good,
containers.
yeah, good packages will use the heck out of that. So you want to see if this thing works? The first time it might fail because there's nothing to truncate. So what I can do is right click and disable the truncate. And now there's a lot of ways to execute a package, right? You've got like this green VCR play button right up here, and then you've got like you've got like start debugging on the debug window, F5, right? And the reason why I don't like those is because what's my first step in this package? It's truncate table. And if I click on debug and I start debugging, it's going to go to whatever package is set as my startup package. And by the time I figure out I screwed something up, chances are I already truncated whatever tables that package ran, right? So in my opinion, I wish there wasn't those other ways of executing a package. I wish you could only do it right here. The right way to execute a package is to right click on it and execute package on that window. And then you'll see this package run and you'll see green arrows. And look, the great thing about it is it says 9 rows moved over. Oh, that's great. You want to test that out? We can go here. We can go to T-SQL, select star from employee temp, and there it is. And now, there it is, 9 rows, yeah. And so I can come back here, and I can right-click and enable, and then I stop it. And because of the truncate, I can just execute it as often as I'd like, and you'll see green arrows, and you'll be able to see, again, 9 rows moved over. So that is an intro to SSIS to make you a little more comfortable with the tool. And now when you go over to, I want you to notice one more thing, which is in the control flow, this SSIS toolbox is all the control tasks, right? If I move over to data flow, that toolbox has changed. And instead of like FTP and stuff like that in control flow, this stuff is focused on what to do with actual data going across. And there's a lot of power here. And he talks about that power in this chapter. He talks about data profiling and he talks about CDC a little bit and pivoting data. And, probably the most common thing that people do here, this data flow is really, really simple. This is like an EL package, right? Extract and load, right? I'm not really doing any transforming. But if I wanted to do transforming, I can just go to data conversion. And instead of having this band here, I can say move it over to data conversion, then move it out of data conversion, and then inside data conversion, I want to change like what's a good thing? I want to change birth date instead of being a timestamp. I want to change it to just a string or a date. Yeah. So that people have a tendency of doing in the SQL, but sometimes you're not dealing with SQL sources. You're dealing with like Excel or a CSV. And the CSV, that's famous for this. CSV, all that data is just going to come back as a string, right? So you want to throw a data conversion in there to say, no, I expect a float coming out on that column. There you go. Did I make the 15-minute mark? That's SSIS in 15 minutes.
Cool. I liked it.
Cool. And that's actually transforming, right? That's a very, very minor transform because it's a little data conversion, but you can do a lot of complicated things. One thing is the aggregate. You can do that. You can do sorting. Now, you might look, okay, I can do this stuff in SQL. And let's talk about that because this is an excellent problem. This is where we value add because we consult in this. You could say, well, I can sort in SQL or I can aggregate in SQL. Like, why don't I just write that here when I go to my employee source? And you know how you can say, I want that as a SQL command. And we know how to like select some, order amount, from sales, right? There, I'm aggregating, right? Or I'm ordering, order by customer ID, and then I've got to have a group by in there, right? Group by customer ID, and then put, customer ID in here, right? Okay, like why would I have a sort in SSIS when I could just have an order by column right here in my query? And the answer to that is it depends on the source system. Fundamentally, your company needs to be able to sell things in order to stay in business. It actually doesn't need to report on the things that it's selling. That is not its primary job, right? Its primary job is to actually sell things. And you don't want to interfere with selling things. And so when you embed this kind of stuff in the transactional system, you're telling the transactional system to do more work than is strictly necessary. The easiest thing for the transaction system to do is just give you data. And so this is why often, and I'm going to open up Notepad, you will see something like this. You will see like a transactional system here, and then you'll see staging here, and then you'll see a data warehouse here. And I can't remember what I've ever said before. So Rob, if I'm being repetitive, you'll tell me. So this is the OLTP system. This is staging. And this is the data mart. Okay, and then you'll put arrows in here. Here's an arrow. And this will be ETL here, and this will be ETL here. And this ETL here will have no sorting. No sorting. No, none of that here. And then here you'll have like all sorts, aggregates, joins, messiness, right, will be here because nobody cares about staging. So the point is, we've learned from long experience that we want to have a very light touch in the OLTP system because we don't want to load. Probably one of the reasons why we have a BI project is because our analytics was slowing down our transaction systems, and people were complaining, and we said, well, we got to get reporting off of that. Well, how can we do that? Oh, I know how. We can create a data mart, and then no more reporting off the transaction system. And if we're going to do that, that means we're going to be loading data from the transaction system and moving it over to the data mart. We need to remember to be as light as possible. And that's why if a sort is necessary, because we're doing like trying to find distinct rows or something, or an aggregate is necessary, that's why we're probably more inclined to do it in the SSIS package. Now, the other thing is SSIS, believe it or not, is scalable. Like, you can put it on its own machine, and it is just memory intensive as all get out. So if you need more RAM, you just throw RAM into one machine, and it just sits there and cranks on SSIS and uses all of its RAM to widen that pipeline that it uses to push data through it. That is very difficult. That's easy to tune. It's very difficult to tune like a SQL server because you're sorting too much, right? Like you can't tell SQL, hey, give me a gig and only allocate it to sorting stuff, right? Like SQL does not have that tuning button to make that happen, right? SQL decides to use its memory however SQL wants to use its memory. And we would like to think that we have control over how it uses it, but really we're just trying to kind of trick it into using it the way we want to use it. Where in SSIS, we have a lot more control. We can say, hey, this is my data pipeline. Now use all the memory for it and put it on its own server. And that way, maybe sorts are more efficient there. So I've found that with SQL developers, they're more inclined to solve problems in the tool they know and not use some of these tools in SSIS that can be very powerful and very fast.
I am a big fan of having a package server.
Yeah.
Just dedicated to packaging.
Yeah. If you can afford it, because you have to license it.
Oh,
Yeah.
But you can also, well, yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to. I don't want to get too hairy into a licensing conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, all right. Well, I think
But
we hit
I,
our
I will
hour.
say that a package server doesn't have to match like the horsepower of your production server. I've done lots of package servers on just 8 gig VMs because your disk requirements aren't going to be nearly what your transactional system is. You just want a nice fat network pipe and a lot of RAM and go for it.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. Yep. All
Cool.
right. Well, I don't see any questions here. Were there any questions before we finish up our podcast? Hopefully, you guys got some questions answered and you enjoyed the conversation on the book. Oh, hey, do you guys want to know what we're going to do next? Rob, what do you think we should do for next week? So, if we look at the table of contents, it looks like chapter 8 starts at like 31% or so. And then if we, oh, we could do through chapter 10, what is that? 31% to 52%. So that's like a quarter of the book. So what do you think? Like,
Yeah, but it's a lot of pictures and stuff, so it reads pretty quick.
okay, what do you think? Should we include one more chapter?
Let's see what 11 is. Writing a new script,
So we
Mdx
would be
scripting.
doing 8, 9, and 10 for sure. And I guess do we want to include 11 and 12
Let
in
me see
that?
what 12 is. Let's just do 2, 3, 10, so that the month after we're like pretty much just head down in MDX and moving data around.
Okay, sounds
Because
great.
chapter 11 is writing MDX, and chapter 12 is pulling it out and building it up,
So
retaining it in the
we're
table.
gonna do 8, 9, and 10 for the month of September. All right, sounds good. Anyway,
Cool.
always good talking to you, Rob, and thanks for
Oh,
coming,
enjoyed
guys.
it.
Yeah.
If you guys are in Oklahoma City this weekend, come to our SQL Saturday.
Oh, nice. What day is that?
Uh, Saturday in just a couple days.
Oh, yeah. Are you speaking?
Yes,
Nice.
I'm speaking on a bunch of different data store technologies.
Nice. All right. Thanks for coming. We'll see you guys next month.
See ya.